night settles gently over an ancient world, spreading a soft calm across distant mountains, quiet fields, and stone-lined roads that once carried countless footsteps, each one drifting now like a fading echo beneath the slow breath of time. And within this wide stillness, the life of a young Macedonian rises softly, not through noise or force, but through the quiet certainty of a steady journey. Alexander's story in this softened telling begins in a landscape shaped by calm routines and measured ambitions, where early mornings carried the smell of earth, stables, and fresh air, and where the palace at Pella stood not as a towering monument, but as a place of daily practice, simple meals, and the gentle pace of learning that shaped a young mind. Born in 356 BCE, his childhood unfolded among hills, washed with sunlight, open riding grounds, and tutors who moved between scrolls, open courtyards, and shaded walkways. His father, Philip II, guided Macedonia through gradual transformation, strengthening the kingdom with careful planning, calm diplomacy, and steady training rather than sudden upheaval. Alexander grew up watching the rhythm of this ordered world, observing how soldiers trained with predictable steps, how leaders listened before acting, and how decisions shaped not only kingship, but the quiet life of the people around him. His mother, Olympias, carried her own influence within the palace, giving Alexander a sense of confidence that extended beyond formal lessons. Yet in this soft version of his story, her presence is not dramatic or fiery, but steady, shaping his awareness of responsibility and the expectations placed gently on his shoulders. When Aristotle arrived to teach him, the lessons flowed like long summer afternoons. Readings in shaded gardens, conversations about nature and faraway lands, and patient reflection on how different cultures lived and governed. These teachings did not ignite restlessness in him, but rather a calm curiosity about the world beyond Macedonia's borders. As Alexander reached his teenage years, he followed his father across training fields, listening quietly during councils, learning how alliances formed, and understanding the slow but purposeful organization behind Macedonia's growing strength. At 16, when Philip traveled on campaign, Alexander briefly took on responsibilities at home, guiding local matters with quiet steadiness, addressing small tensions, and maintaining peace with the calm authority he had observed for years. By 18, he joined his father in battle at Chaeronea, moving not with a burst of violence but with practiced coordination, aligning with the cavalry and supporting the infantry in a smooth, deliberate motion that helped secure the field. It was not the chaos of battle that defined him in this softened telling, but the quiet confidence he carried, the understanding of timing, and the way he steadied the men around him. When Philip II died unexpectedly, the shift in power was felt across Greece, yet Alexander stepped into the moment without haste or panic. He spoke to the army with calm clarity, reaffirmed alliances, and settled disputes within the palace with measured decisions. His early rule did not shake Greece with fear, but guided it back into unity through slow movement, gentle meetings with city leaders, and a focus on restoring order so daily life across the region could continue steadily. As Greece settled into peace, the long-prepared plan to cross eastward resurfaced. It was not framed as conquest in this softened version, but as an extended expedition into lands long connected through trade, stories, and distant alliances. Alexander moved toward this journey with quiet purpose, studying maps, reviewing logistics, and organizing his troops with calm precision. The army he inherited from Philip was disciplined and well-trained, moving like a single practiced body, each formation flowing into the next. Alexander refined their coordination, ensuring that their pace was smooth, their routines familiar, and their transitions gentle, so that when they eventually stepped beyond the borders of Macedonia, they would move not as an invading force, but as a cohesive group prepared for long travel. In these early years, the foundation of Alexander's character formed not through sudden glory or the roar of crowds, but through the quiet repetition of daily learning, the steady observation of leadership, and the calm understanding that responsibility rests not in noise but in consistency. His story grows from this silence, from these slow-building habits, from the patient shaping of a young man who watched the world carefully before stepping into it. And as the ancient world settles into its gentle rhythm, Alexander's path begins to stretch softly before him, leading toward distant lands, wide rivers, and countless horizons waiting just beyond the calm edge of morning. The quiet rise of a young king. As the early foundations of Alexander's life settled gently into place, the world around him continued to shift in slow, steady rhythms, shaping the landscape that he would soon guide with calm determination. Macedonia, strengthened by Philip's years of work, moved through each season with predictable patterns, fields being plowed, horses trained on open ground, couriers crossing quiet valleys, and the long hum of preparation that supported every corner of the kingdom. Alexander stepped into these movements naturally, carrying the lessons of his childhood into the growing responsibilities that awaited him, and observing how each small decision contributed to the wider harmony of the land. The palace at Pella, once merely the backdrop of his youth, became a place where he listened more carefully, watching ministers discuss trade, officers review maps, and envoys bring news from distant regions. He did not rush into these settings. Instead, he entered quietly, learning the rhythm of each meeting, understanding the way experienced voices exchanged thoughts, and gradually forming his own sense of leadership, rooted in steadiness rather than force. These early interactions shaped the calm confidence that would later define him, giving him a clear sense of the responsibilities he would one day hold. As Macedonia continued to settle into the unity Philip had created, Alexander accompanied his father on journeys across the land, traveling through rolling hills and shaded villages where the sound of daily work filled the atmosphere. The soldiers he observed trained with predictable formations, lifting their spears in repeated motions that created a quiet rhythm of discipline. Alexander moved among them not as a distant prince, but as someone who respected their routines, shared their pace, and understood the calm strength behind their loyalty. These steady impressions stayed with him, forming the core of his leadership style: consistent, patient, and attentive. During these years, Greece beyond Macedonia continued to shift with its own gentle pressures. City-states on the southern mainland adjusted to the new balance of power that Philip had established. Some accepted the stability with ease, appreciating the end of long-running rivalries, while others held onto old habits, hesitant to fully embrace change. Alexander watched these movements closely, studying how diplomacy, communication, and measured presence helped maintain harmony. He saw that unity was not built in a single moment, but through a series of small, deliberate steps, each one contributing to a wider peace. When Philip prepared for the large campaign eastward, Alexander observed the organization with quiet attention. Supplies moved across roads, ships were repaired along the northern coast, and envoys traveled between Macedonia and Greece to maintain readiness. The work did not carry the intensity of urgency. Rather, it resembled the gathering of a long journey, arranged slowly and carefully, as if each part understood the time itself was willing to stretch for the sake of preparation. Alexander found comfort in this steadiness, absorbing the sense that great undertakings began with simple, unhurried tasks and a clear plan. Then came the moment when Philip's unexpected death changed the shape of everything. Yet even this transition, which could have erupted into chaos, unfolded with a calmness shaped by Alexander's composed response. He did not allow fear or disorder to spread. Instead, he moved through the palace with quiet assurance, meeting with generals, speaking with advisors, and addressing soldiers who looked to him for direction. His voice remained steady, the tone carrying not command but confidence, reminding everyone that the structure Philip had built was still intact, and that continuity depended on calm decisions rather than sudden action. Across Greece, word of Philip's passing traveled slowly, carried by messengers who crossed mountains and coastal roads. Some cities considered reclaiming their independence, but Alexander responded with deliberate, measured movement. He traveled south with his troops at a steady pace, not to intimidate, but to remind the region of the agreements they had formed together. Meetings were held in open squares, on shaded steps of public buildings, or within halls where leaders spoke quietly about the future. Alexander reassured them through presence alone, showing that Macedonia remained stable and that unity could continue without disturbance. As calm returned to the Greek mainland, the preparations for the eastern journey resurfaced. Alexander approached this plan with a softened sense of purpose. Rather than viewing it as a path of conquest, he saw it as a long expedition into lands shaped by centuries of trade, culture, and shifting borders. He reviewed maps with gentle focus, studying rivers, mountain ranges, and regions dotted with familiar and unfamiliar names. Advisors brought information about climates, languages, and customs, each detail adding depth to his understanding of the world ahead. In Macedonia, the army continued its routines, marching across flat fields, adjusting formations, and practicing maneuvers in a steady flow. Alexander joined these sessions regularly, riding alongside commanders, walking among infantry lines, and reviewing the condition of equipment and supplies. He valued the smooth synchrony of the phalanx, the controlled movement of cavalry, and the quiet discipline that marked the Macedonian forces. His leadership strengthened their confidence, creating a sense of shared purpose that did not rely on loud declarations but on the calm reassurance that he understood their needs and respected their efforts. Before setting out, Alexander spent time reviewing the organization of his homeland. He ensured that regions were administered with care, that roads remained functional, that supplies were well distributed, and that local leaders understood their roles in maintaining stability. This process unfolded like a slow inspection through familiar landscapes, where he offered gentle guidance, listened to concerns, and arranged support where needed. By the time he prepared to leave, Macedonia moved with predictable balance, able to continue smoothly during his absence. When spring arrived and the sea grew calmer, the time came for the army to cross toward Asia. The air carried a soft warmth, and the gentle shift of light across the water marked the beginning of the long journey. Alexander gathered with his men at the shoreline, the sound of waves blending with the quiet murmurs of preparation. The ships were sturdy and well-maintained, each one waiting patiently for the signal to embark. As they boarded, the atmosphere remained peaceful. Supplies were loaded with careful routine, horses stepped onto transport vessels with steady motions, and soldiers settled into their positions as the ships drifted from the harbor. The crossing was smooth, the water reflecting the sky in broad, calm stretches, and Alexander stood at the bow, observing the world ahead, not with restlessness but with a quiet sense of purpose shaped by years of preparation. When the ships reached Asia, the shore welcomed them with gentle wind and warm sand. The men disembarked in an orderly flow, carrying gear across the beach while officers reviewed the surroundings. Alexander stepped onto the unfamiliar land with the same calm precision that guided his rule, feeling the beginning of his long journey unfold beneath his feet, like a new chapter written without haste. This was not the start of a conquest defined by noise or intensity. It was the continuation of a steady path shaped by patience, observation, and a quiet determination that had grown within him since childhood. The world ahead stretched peacefully into the horizon, carrying landscapes, cultures, and stories that would soon become part of the gentle tapestry of his expanding journey. The quiet crossing into Asia Minor. When the army finished settling onto the calm shores of Asia, the landscape around them stretched in soft colors, a mixture of rolling hills and distant plains, touched by gentle morning haze. The land felt familiar in its simplicity, yet carried a sense of quiet difference, as if it had waited patiently for new footsteps to move across its open fields. Alexander stood among his men, observing the rhythm of their arrival with the same composed stillness that had guided him from Macedonia. There was no rush, only a smooth unfolding of tasks, each one completed with careful hands and steady coordination. The first days on Asian soil passed in a quiet routine. Soldiers organized their encampment, set up lines of tents, and arranged supplies in neat clusters. Officers reviewed maps with Alexander in the afternoons, discussing terrain, distances, and the gentle patterns of the land that lay ahead. The nights were peaceful, filled with the soft hum of conversation, the steady crackle of small fires, and the distant sounds of animals moving through the surrounding fields. The atmosphere gave Alexander space to observe, listen, and reflect on the long journey that was beginning, not with noise or urgency, but with the calm confidence of steady preparation. The regions they entered were shaped by years of settled life, their towns composed of modest buildings, markets with familiar rhythms, and roads shaped by countless travelers. Many communities received Alexander with calm acceptance, recognizing the arrival of a well-organized force that sought not to disrupt, but to move forward in a smooth, predictable manner. Local leaders approached him with measured curiosity, discussing practical matters of governance, trade routes, and daily routines rather than conflicts. Alexander approached these meetings with quiet respect, acknowledging the customs that had shaped each region long before his arrival. As the army moved inland, the spring air carried a mild warmth, and the path ahead became a long ribbon of earth leading through fields dotted with small orchards and clusters of stone houses. Alexander often rode near the front, his pace steady, his observations collected without hurry, each landscape blended gently into the next. Quiet valleys, narrow rivers, whose surfaces glistened in the light, and small villages where children watched from shaded doorways as the Macedonian formations passed with steady, unbroken steps. The calm of these journeys reminded Alexander of the long rides he had taken through Macedonia with his father, when the world felt wide and patient, and time seemed to move with a steady breath. The army's movement through Asia Minor did not rely on sudden decisions or quick turns. Instead, it followed a smooth line of strategy planned long before the crossing. Alexander visited local administrators to understand the condition of roads, available supplies, and the natural rhythms of the region. These meetings unfolded with gentle exchanges of information rather than tension. He noted how the land changed gradually in climate and terrain, observing everything from soil quality to river patterns with calm precision, knowing that understanding the land was as important as understanding its people. As they continued, certain regions that had once belonged to Persian governance now viewed Alexander's presence with quiet caution. Yet even here, his approach was consistent: measured conversations, fair adjustments, and a steady transition of oversight. The lack of disruption reassured many communities, allowing their routines to continue with little alteration. Markets stayed open, fields continued to be cultivated, and daily life maintained its slow, dependable pace, even as new leadership quietly took root. When the army approached areas where small defensive groups were positioned, Alexander guided his forces with carefully planned movements, ensuring that any engagement remained controlled and brief. His goal was not to ignite sudden conflict, but to stabilize the path ahead. The Macedonian formations, trained through years of coordinated practice, moved like a single body, each soldier understanding his place, each step contributing to the unbroken flow of the advancing line. Even in moments of tension, Alexander kept his tone calm, his commands clear, creating an atmosphere where his men acted with assurance rather than fear. News of the Macedonian advance spread slowly across the region, carried by travelers, merchants, and local messengers. Rather than alarming communities, the reports often brought a sense of curiosity. Many had heard of Alexander's youth, discipline, and steady leadership. When they saw him in person, riding quietly among his troops, listening attentively during discussions, offering practical solutions without imposing unnecessary demands, their apprehension softened into acceptance. It was not the arrival of chaos they witnessed, but the gentle integration of new authority into familiar landscapes. As weeks turned into months, Alexander's understanding of Asia Minor deepened. He became familiar with its coastline, where the sea spread out in wide, calm blue stretches, with its inner plains, where open fields breathed with warm air, and with its mountain passes, where cool winds carried the scent of pine and stone. Each encounter with local culture, whether through shared meals, spoken stories, or observations of daily tasks, became part of the quiet map he carried in his mind. His interest in the land extended beyond strategy. He appreciated its textures, rhythms, and the subtle shifts that marked each region. The Macedonian army adapted as well, settling into a comfortable routine as they traveled. They marched at predictable hours, rested at midday under shaded groves or beside streams, and prepared their camps every evening with practiced efficiency. The calm pace helped maintain their strength, reinforcing their confidence in Alexander's guidance. Officers rotated responsibilities smoothly, reviewing conditions daily, and ensuring that the army remained steady in both spirit and organization. This sense of continuity gave the men a feeling of stability, grounding them even as they ventured farther from home. During this time, Alexander spent long evenings reviewing maps and discussing the path toward the larger cities of the region. His conversations with generals such as Parmenion unfolded gently, focused not on ambition but on thoughtful planning. Which roads were best maintained, which local communities could offer supplies, and how the army could move without disrupting the natural order of the lands they passed through. These sessions shaped the steady rhythm of the campaign, ensuring that progress remained smooth and coordinated. The further they moved, the more Alexander saw how interconnected the lands had become through years of shared trade routes and cultural exchange. Markets held goods from distant places, and travelers spoke of regions far beyond the horizon. This awareness shaped his approach. Instead of viewing each city as isolated, he saw them as parts of a broader tapestry, connected through quiet lines of movement and communication. This understanding influenced his decisions, reinforcing his preference for gentle integration rather than abrupt imposition of new structures. When the army approached the region near the river where the Persian satraps had stationed defensive units, Alexander prepared with the same calm clarity that had marked each step of the journey. The land around the river was wide and open, resting beneath soft sunlight. The flow of water was steady, carrying the reflections of clouds gently across its surface. Alexander reviewed the terrain not as a challenge to overcome, but as a natural space to understand. He advised his commanders to position the phalanx carefully, ensuring the soldiers felt secure in their formations, and arranged the cavalry in a way that allowed them to move smoothly along the riverbank without disturbance. Even when the moment came to engage with the defenses, the atmosphere remained controlled. The Macedonian troops crossed with steady focus, guided by clear signals and quiet discipline. The encounter did not erupt into chaos. Instead, it unfolded like a practiced exercise, each movement deliberate and predictable. When the opposition withdrew, the region settled again into its quiet routines, and Alexander ensured that the transition of oversight proceeded with respect and understanding. Following this moment, the army continued its path deeper into Asia Minor, the landscape opening before them in gradual waves of hills and plains. The air shifted subtly as they moved, carrying scents of new vegetation and the distant echoes of unfamiliar regions. Alexander felt the slow expansion of his path, recognizing that each step carried him farther from the familiar courtyards of Pella and deeper into the extended horizon he had envisioned since his youth. Through it all, the journey remained gentle. There were no loud declarations, no rushing movements, only a steady progression shaped by careful planning and quiet determination. Alexander's leadership kept the army balanced, his presence offering reassurance that each part of the expedition was guided with a calm hand. And as the sun set across the wide fields of Asia Minor, casting long, soft shadows over the earth, the Macedonian camp would settle into its nightly rhythm, fires glowing faintly, voices low and relaxed, and the sense of a long journey unfolding at a peaceful, measured pace. Alexander would sit with his officers, reviewing the day with the same steady clarity as always, preparing quietly for the steps that awaited them beyond the next horizon. A calm descent toward the Persian roads. The journey deeper into Asia continued with a steady quietness, the kind that grows naturally from long days of walking across gentle landscapes where the horizon stretches wide and unbroken. As the Macedonian army moved forward, the land shifted gradually beneath their feet, changing from soft rolling plains into broader stretches of open country, shaped by the slow work of wind and time. Alexander observed these shifts with a calm attentiveness, feeling the subtle change in air, the different tone of the soil under the horses, and the way each region carried its own quiet signature. Villages appeared along the route without fanfare, their stone houses resting in the shade of scattered trees, their fields lying open beneath the warm sunlight. People watched the approaching army with cautious curiosity, though their unease softened once they witnessed the orderly movements and the respectful manner in which the Macedonians passed. Alexander encouraged officers to keep interactions gentle and practical, ensuring that each community understood the army would not disrupt their daily life. This allowed trade to continue, markets to remain open, and daily work to flow without interruption. Over time, the people grew accustomed to the sight of disciplined lines of soldiers moving through their countryside at a predictable, unhurried pace. The army itself settled into an even deeper rhythm. Morning routines unfolded the same way each day, soldiers waking to the first soft light, packs being strapped, tents folded with practiced hands, and breakfast prepared quietly over small fires. Officers rode out to assess the next stretch of road, returning with calm updates about water sources, resting points, and terrain. Alexander listened with steady focus, rarely interrupting, allowing his commander's experience to blend smoothly into the larger plan. His manner had a way of lowering tension, ensuring that decisions, even important ones, felt like natural extensions of the journey. As they neared regions known to be more directly connected to the Persian administrative network, the roads became broader and more worn by centuries of travel. These routes carried goods from inland towns to coastal markets, and Alexander often noticed caravans moving in the distance, their silhouettes drifting slowly across the land like quiet processions. When these caravans approached the Macedonian column, their drivers guided them to the side with respectful nods, and Alexander exchanged simple greetings, recognizing that the routes belonged to many peoples long before his arrival. These gentle encounters contributed to the peaceful atmosphere that surrounded the expedition, making the forward movement feel like part of a larger flow of life rather than an abrupt intrusion. In the evenings, the camps settled into predictable harmony. Fires glowed with soft warmth, cooking pots simmered with steady bubbles, and the low murmur of conversation spread through the tents. Some men played simple games with stones or seeds, while others cleaned their equipment with slow motions, letting their thoughts drift into the quiet. Alexander sometimes walked through the camp, pausing to observe the patterns of rest and recovery that sustained his soldiers. He did not speak often during these walks. He simply absorbed the atmosphere, understanding that the calm of the men was as important as any tactical advantage. During these evenings, he also spent time reviewing reports with his closest officers, studying terrain sketches and updates from scouts. The discussions were measured and deliberate, focusing on the next days rather than distant goals. They talked about streams to cross, open areas suitable for rest, and which towns might offer supplies without discomfort. Alexander preferred this gradual planning, as it allowed the army to move without strain, ensuring that mistakes had time to be corrected gently if needed. He valued the patience embedded in this method, recognizing that slow decisions often created stronger outcomes. As the army passed through regions with Persian influence, Alexander noticed how different the architecture became. Administrative buildings were set in neat rows, roads were more firmly paved, and storage depots sat near river crossings. The efficiency of these settlements impressed him, giving him insight into how the Persian Empire organized vast distances with steady, practical systems. Rather than seeing these structures as obstacles, he observed them with quiet respect, appreciating how they helped the region function with consistency. These observations would later shape how he envisioned the future of the lands he crossed, not as a series of isolated territories, but as connected parts of a wider, well-structured world. Some satrapal officials, hearing of Alexander's approach, chose to meet him peacefully. Their visits were calm affairs, taking place in shaded courtyards or small administrative halls where scribes recorded practical agreements. These meetings lacked any sense of confrontation. Instead, they centered on maintaining local stability, ensuring that communities continued their routines, and guaranteeing that existing systems remained functional. Alexander often reassured them that cooperation, not disruption, was his priority. This approach allowed transitions to unfold with minimal disturbance, preserving the soft rhythm of the land. Travel continued in long, quiet stretches. The sun rose and set over fields of grain, over dry plateaus softened by evening light, and over riverbeds where water flowed gently between smooth stones. Alexander found comfort in the simple repetition of days. He enjoyed the slow pace of traveling through terrain that changed gradually, offering new impressions without overwhelming the senses. The gentle roll of hills to the east, the distant glimpses of mountain silhouettes, and the soft movement of wind across open fields all contributed to the calm experience of the journey. Scouts sent ahead returned with reports that the route toward the interior remained clear and that the communities nearby were willing to allow safe passage. Alexander appreciated these small certainties. They supported the steady movement of the expedition, ensuring that the army's progress felt like part of a natural sequence rather than a forced advance. In this softened telling, the path forward unfolded like a long, unwinding thread drawn smoothly across the land. When the Macedonian forces reached areas where Persian defensive groups were lightly stationed, Alexander once again approached the situation with calm planning. He studied the land with his officers, focusing on how to position his troops in a way that maintained safety without creating disruption. The resulting encounters were brief and controlled, marked by slow, deliberate maneuvers rather than energetic conflict. These moments reassured the army that their training and discipline could maintain stability, even in unfamiliar circumstances. Alexander's leadership during these situations was steady, emphasizing clarity, calm communication, and precise coordination. The soldiers trusted his judgment, sensing that he valued their well-being and sought to preserve the quiet momentum of the campaign. This trust deepened as the army continued forward, creating a strong foundation for the steps that lay ahead. As they traveled further, the landscape shifted into wider plains, touched by warm breezes that carried the scent of dry grasses and distant wildflowers. Small flocks of birds moved across the sky, casting soft shadows on the ground below. Alexander observed these scenes with thoughtful appreciation, recognizing the natural beauty of the land as part of the experience of the journey itself. These quiet moments allowed him time to reflect on the broader purpose of the campaign, not as a series of confrontations, but as a long exploration of regions connected by history, culture, and geography. Gradually, the routes began to align toward the broader Persian roads that stretched deep into the empire. These roads were known for their durability and the steady flow of couriers and merchants who had depended on them for generations. Approaching them felt like stepping into a larger system, one that carried its own calm rhythm of travel and exchange. Alexander understood the significance of this step. It represented the gentle merging of his path with the established pathways of an older world. As the Macedonian army reached these roads, Alexander paused briefly with his officers to take in the quiet significance of the moment. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the stones that made up the ancient route. Caravans in the distance moved slowly, their silhouettes softened by dust and evening light. The air was warm and still, carrying the faint murmur of travelers' voices. This was the beginning of a deeper phase of the journey. Ahead lay regions shaped by centuries of calm organization, steady trade, and administrative order. Alexander felt the quiet power of these lands, not in force or spectacle, but in the enduring structures that held them together. And with this understanding, he guided his men forward, their steps aligning with the gentle rhythm of the Persian roads, their journey continuing in unbroken calm toward the heart of the world they had only just begun to enter. Along the wide roads of the empire, the entry onto the great roads that stretched across the land marked a new, smooth chapter in the journey, not because anything changed suddenly, but because the path itself seemed to widen beneath the feet of the marching men, offering a more open and predictable surface that guided them gently towards the interior. The road had been built long before Alexander's arrival, shaped through years of steady labor, used by traders, travelers, and messengers who moved between distant cities with quiet purpose. Its stones carried the soft memory of countless steps, and now the Macedonian army joined that long procession, becoming part of a movement older than any single kingdom. Travel along this road brought a sense of calm continuity. The surface beneath their sandals remained firm and even, allowing the formations to move in a slow, unbroken rhythm. Alexander noticed how the road followed natural contours of the land, rising gently along slopes, curving smoothly around fields, and descending into shallow valleys where streams crossed beneath small stone bridges. These bridges had the worn look of places that had served generations, and Alexander often paused on them briefly, looking downstream at the quiet passage of water that had shaped the stones in a patient, unhurried way. The road occasionally passed through small settlements built close to its edges. These villages, shaped by long familiarity with passing travelers, welcomed the Macedonian presence with cautious curiosity but little alarm. Their markets displayed woven cloth, dried grains, pottery, and baskets filled with simple goods. Alexander sometimes stopped to observe, guiding his officers to keep interactions respectful and light. The villagers responded with wary nods that soon softened into simple, everyday exchanges, allowing life to continue without disruption. The march was unhurried. Soldiers moved in lines that breathed together, their steps creating a soft, collective sound, steady and regular. The sun rose and set across the wide landscapes, shifting light across distant hills and long stretches of grass that bent gently in the wind. Occasionally, the men passed groups of merchants leading animals loaded with goods. These encounters were quiet, marked only by soft greetings and the respectful stepping aside of both groups to allow each other space on the road. Alexander continued to study everything with patient attention. He noted how the road connected agricultural communities, administrative outposts, and market centers, creating a network that maintained the region's stability. The route revealed how carefully the land had been organized, how distance had been bridged by structure and routine. This encouraged Alexander's vision of a world held together not by force, but by roads, ideas, and steady exchanges that sustained people calmly across provinces. During midday rests, the army often paused in the shade of clusters of trees or beside streams where the sound of water softened the weight of the sun. Soldiers removed their armor, letting their bodies cool as they ate simple meals of bread, fruit, and dried meats. These breaks carried a quiet intimacy, a shared understanding that rest was as important as motion. Alexander, seated among his companions, listened to light conversations and gentle laughter that rose from the groups scattered across the ground. These small moments restored strength more effectively than any speech or command. As they continued onward, Alexander met local officials who remained loyal to the Persian administration but greeted him calmly. These meetings took place in shaded courtyards or simple rooms lined with wooden beams. The discussions focused on practical matters: storage of grain, seasonal harvests, water access, and trade routes that linked the villages. Alexander's approach was steady and unthreatening. He reassured each official that local life would continue without abrupt change and that the people under their guidance would be respected. This softened many concerns that might have arisen from the presence of a large, traveling army. Further along the route, the geography shifted again. The plains widened, stretching into open spaces where the wind moved freely across the land, carrying the scent of distant crops and the dry warmth of the approaching summer. The road led them through gentle rises that offered views of faraway settlements and rolling terrain that faded into the horizon. These scenes reminded Alexander of parts of Macedonia, though the colors here seemed softer, the air warmer, and the land more expansive. Occasionally, the army passed through old watchposts or small fortified towers that had once served as relay points for Persian couriers. Their stone walls bore signs of long use, but the structures remained sturdy. Alexander often entered them briefly, examining the layout and observing how messages had been passed efficiently across the empire. He appreciated the simplicity and effectiveness of the system, noting how each tower played a quiet but essential role in maintaining order. These places sparked ideas that he tucked away for future consideration. The following days brought longer stretches of calm travel along the road. The army settled deeper into its routine. Evenings passed under wide skies, slowly shifting from gold to violet, As the sun descended, fires were lit in measured lines, their glow soft and comforting as men prepared their meals. Officers reviewed the day's progress, mapping out the next steps. Alexander participated in these discussions with focused calm, valuing the measured exchange of thoughts that guided their movement. He found himself reflecting often on the balance between movement and rest. The long road offered a natural rhythm, mornings filled with slow energy, afternoons heavy with heat and patience, evenings returning with a feeling of completion. This cyclical pattern made the journey feel timeless, as though they were part of a continuous flow, rather than a campaign with sharp edges. It allowed him to maintain a sense of clarity, focusing on the broader landscape rather than the immediate pressures that campaigns often produced. As they approached the central regions of Asia Minor, larger towns appeared, built with more structure and shaped by the influence of Persian governance. These towns had organized markets, central squares, and administrative offices where scribes recorded transactions with steady hands. Alexander entered these spaces with the same quiet respect as before. He observed the craftsmanship of the buildings, the soft hum of trade, and the way people moved through their routines with confidence. His interactions with local leaders remained calm and practical, centered on continuation rather than change. One evening, the army camped near a shallow river whose surface shimmered with the last light of the day. The water moved slowly, its sound blending gently with the rustle of grass and the distant call of birds settling in for the night. Soldiers knelt to wash their hands and faces, letting the cool water refresh them after a long day's march. Alexander watched the scene with a sense of quiet appreciation. The journey, though long, carried moments of simple peace that reminded him of the landscapes of his youth. As the days continued, the wide Persian road carried them steadily toward regions where the presence of the empire grew more evident. Administrative stations were spaced at predictable intervals. Storage buildings held goods transported across provinces. Messengers passed by with rolled documents tied neatly at their belts. These signs revealed the scale of the system that had supported the land for generations. Alexander absorbed this knowledge with calm interest, recognizing that understanding these structures would help him shape future plans that stretched beyond the boundaries of Macedonia. The army advanced without hurry, and as they moved deeper into the land, the weather grew warmer and the colors of the landscape shifted once more. Fields took on a golden hue beneath the sun, and distant hills stood in soft contrast against wide blue skies. Alexander could sense that they were approaching the threshold of new regions, places closer to the coastal cities that connected Asia Minor to the southern lands. Everything in the journey so far had unfolded with an ease that reflected Alexander's steady approach. Measured, respectful, observant. His men felt grounded by his composure, reassured by the gentle progression of each day. The peaceful movement along the great road marked a significant transition, signifying not only the physical approach toward the Persian-controlled regions, but also the emotional settling of the army into the calm acceptance of the long journey ahead. And as the road stretched onward, wide and inviting beneath the fading afternoon light, Alexander continued guiding his army forward with the same unbroken calm, each step carrying them further into the deep heart of the lands that awaited them just beyond the next soft bend in the road. Toward the quiet cities of the southern coast. The long road continued to unwind beneath the steady march of the Macedonian army, guiding them gently toward the southern expanses of Asia Minor, where the land widened, the air warmed, and faint traces of coastal wind drifted inland. Each day carried a quiet sense of progression, not marked by sudden events, but by the subtle shifts in the landscape, the slow rise of gentle hills, the soft curve of distant ridges, and the gradual spread of vegetation, shaped by the sea's unseen breath. As they moved farther south, the villages became slightly larger, their markets filled with goods that hinted at proximity to coastal trade. Pottery displayed smooth glazes in warm colors, cloth dyed with deeper shades, and bundles of dried herbs held traces of the salty air from ports not yet visible. Alexander walked through these markets with quiet interest, observing objects that carried a different craftsmanship from the inland regions. He spoke softly with artisans who worked beside doorways or under shaded awnings, learning how local trade shaped their routines and how the flow of goods connected distant settlements. The people in these areas had grown accustomed to travelers passing between inland towns and seaside centers. As a result, their reactions to the Macedonian presence were calm, practical, and without abrupt concern. Simple gestures, hands raised in greeting, shopkeepers straightening their stalls, children watching curiously from behind baskets, formed the gentle atmosphere that accompanied the army's passage. Alexander valued this smooth acceptance. It affirmed that his approach, grounded in steadiness and respect, continued to ease the transition across lands unfamiliar to his men. The road eventually split into broader paths that carried travelers toward the southern coastline. Alexander chose the gentler route, one known for its mild slopes and dependable water sources. The terrain shifted gradually as the army progressed, opening into wide fields touched by warm breezes that moved through tall grasses with a soft, sweeping sound. These sounds blended easily with the steady march of the men, creating a natural rhythm that made each hour feel elongated and unhurried. The army paused often to rest in areas where streams ran along shallow banks. These places offered the comfort of clear water, the shade of overhanging branches, and the quiet music of flowing currents. Soldiers refreshed themselves, letting cool water wash over their hands and faces. Some took short naps under clusters of trees, leaning against their packs while birds moved among the leaves above them. Alexander watched these peaceful scenes with a patient appreciation, understanding that these small moments of calm preserved the strength and composure of his men more effectively than long speeches or hurried commands. During evenings, the camps filled with low voices and soft activity. Fires glowed gently across the landscape, spaced evenly among the tents. The scent of simple meals drifted in the air, blending with the lingering warmth of the day. Alexander gathered his officers around a modest map table, discussing the next stretches of terrain with quiet concentration. They traced the road toward larger towns closer to the coast, noting how the land curved toward regions known for their stability and organization. Discussions were not urgent. They carried the same relaxed cadence as the journey itself, shaped by shared understanding and mutual trust. As they drew nearer to the southern regions, signs of Persian administration became more visible. Border markers lined the road at long intervals. Rest stations built from smooth stone stood alongside the path, offering shelter for travelers. Alexander explored these structures carefully, impressed by the clean design and the thoughtful placement of wells, storage rooms, and shaded resting areas. These stations revealed how far the influence of organization had spread across the land, maintaining consistency that allowed people to travel with predictability and comfort. The army used these places sparingly, choosing not to disturb the routines of local travelers, but Alexander appreciated the stability they offered. Their path eventually led them near a larger inland town that functioned as a trade hub between the central plateau and the southern coast. The town's entrance was lined with trees, their branches spreading wide and casting soft shadows across the road. Alexander entered calmly with a small escort, allowing the army to camp beyond the outskirts. Local magistrates greeted him within a courtyard paved with smooth stone, where the sound of water from a narrow fountain added a gentle backdrop to their conversation. They discussed supplies, storage, land routes, and coastal roads that lay ahead. Alexander's respectful tone and measured responses reassured them that the arrival of his forces would not disturb the town's quiet order. As he toured the streets with a few officers, he observed the town's slow-moving merchants, its craftsmen shaping tools and ornaments in the shade, and its residents moving between market stalls with baskets and cloth bags. Everything carried the same calm rhythm he had found throughout Asia Minor, an unforced flow of life shaped by predictable routines. The proximity to the sea introduced subtle changes, spices from distant regions, fabrics with lighter patterns, and traders whose ships waited at ports only a few days' travel away. These details painted a clearer picture of the world opening ahead. Leaving the town, the army continued toward the southern landscape where the smell of salt began to mix with the air. Though the sea remained out of sight, its influence touched the breeze and added a freshness to each morning. The road widened further, accommodating the increased movement of goods and animals. Caravans passed more frequently, their drivers offering polite nods before continuing on their routes. Alexander enjoyed speaking briefly with some of them, learning how the road linked inland markets to coastal harbors, where goods traveled across waters to distant lands. The march maintained its smooth flow. Alexander encouraged slower pacing in warmer weather, allowing the men to preserve their energy. He walked on foot, alongside them at times, listening to their conversations, observing their reactions to the changing landscape, and maintaining a gentle presence that reminded them that he remained part of the same long journey. His officers mirrored his calm demeanor, ensuring that discipline remained firm yet restful. The land soon began to slope downward in long, gradual waves leading toward the coastal regions. Vegetation thickened in some areas, forming patches of greenery that signaled water sources nearby. The army often camped near these locations, enjoying the shade and the possibility of bathing in shallow pools or streams. Alexander valued these opportunities for rest. He often sat near the water in the evenings, watching the soft shimmer of reflected light while officers approached with updates on scouting routes and newly gathered information from travelers. As the journey progressed, the population density increased slightly. Villages appeared more frequently, and the road became smoother due to better maintenance near administrative centers. Town criers and market officials signaled the presence of organized trade. Alexander continued to foster peaceful interactions, ensuring that all exchanges remained gentle and free from pressure. This approach gradually built a sense of trust across the settlements they passed. Late one afternoon, the road reached a high ridge where the view opened widely across the southern plains, revealing distant glimmers of light that suggested the nearness of the sea. Though the coast remained a few days away, the sight provided a soft sense of transition, as if the land itself were preparing the army for the new regions awaiting them. The men paused briefly, taking in the expansive view, feeling the cool breeze that drifted over the ridge. Alexander stood quietly among them, appreciating the long distance they had traveled and the calm endurance that had carried them this far. The descent from the ridge was gentle, guiding the army along winding paths shaped by years of constant travel. The land flattened again into soft, open fields, dotted with clusters of homes and farmland. Farmers paused from their work to watch the soldiers pass, offering small gestures of greeting. Herds of animals grazed in the warm light, adding to the peaceful atmosphere that accompanied the army's approach toward the greater southern routes. With each passing mile, Alexander sensed the subtle shift toward the coastal world, a place where cities grew larger, where the influence of trade flourished, and where the next chapters of the journey would unfold. The landscape embraced this transition quietly, allowing the army to move without tension, carried forward by steady steps, calm wind, and the unhurried flow of time. And as the sun dipped below the distant horizon, painting the land with warm colors that softened into dusk, Alexander and his men continued their gentle advance along the wide southern path, drawing ever closer to the quiet coastal cities that now lay just beyond the fading edge of light. Along the quiet edge of the southern sea, the early mornings near the southern lowlands arrived with a different kind of softness, shaped by the nearness of the sea that still remained just beyond sight. The air carried a gentle coolness that lifted slowly as the sun climbed, bringing with it a faint scent of salt that drifted inland from faraway waves. Alexander's army welcomed the change, sensing that they were approaching a new part of the world where the rhythm of life moved with tides instead of mountain winds or inland breezes. The road they followed wound calmly across wide stretches of land dotted with orchards, vineyards, and small clusters of houses shaped from pale stone. Farmers moved through their fields with unhurried precision, guiding animals or tending crops that thrived in the milder coastal climate. When the army passed, the farmers paused briefly, offering nods of acknowledgement before returning to their work, their gestures marked by the same quiet acceptance Alexander had observed in earlier settlements. The men walked with steady pace, their steps softened by the well-maintained roads that led toward larger towns. Occasional groups of traders appeared, some with carts, others with animals loaded with goods. These travelers moved with a practiced ease, accustomed to journeys that connected inland regions to the sea. Alexander found these interactions peaceful, observing how each person carried a small representation of their home through the objects they transported. Dried figs, olive oil, cloth dyed in muted tones, baskets woven with intricate patterns, all hinted at the daily lives of communities that had built their routines around stability and quiet commerce. As the army advanced, the terrain gradually opened, revealing long stretches of fields that extended toward the faint line of the horizon. The sky seemed wider here, brushed with soft colors during dawn and dusk, carrying a stillness that accompanied the march with gentle reassurance. Alexander walked alongside his officers, discussing the coming days with an easy tone. He encouraged the troops to maintain a relaxed pace, aware that the nearness of the coast introduced new environments that deserved patient observation rather than hurried movement. When they reached a slightly elevated rise one afternoon, the view widened dramatically. In the distance, subtle flashes of light shimmered, reflections cast by the sea. The men slowed instinctively, drawn to the quiet sight. Though the coastline remained far away, its presence soothed them, offering a reminder of how vast the journey had been, and how each step continued to bring new landscapes into their experience. Alexander remained still for a long moment, letting the peaceful transition settle into the minds of everyone present. The descent from the rise led them closer to a cluster of villages arranged along a series of gently flowing streams. These waterways created fertile pockets where gardens flourished behind stone walls and where shaded groves offered cool resting places. The villagers welcomed the army with calm politeness. Market squares set beneath wooden awnings displayed local produce and small crafted goods. Children played near the streams, their laughter carried lightly by the breeze without disrupting the quiet atmosphere of the settlement. Alexander walked through the market area with a small escort, speaking softly with elders who described the local roads, the fishing practices of nearby coastal towns, and the mild weather that shaped their seasons. The army camped just beyond the village, settling beneath rows of trees that swayed gently with wind from the south. The men sat in relaxed groups, mending gear, preparing food, or resting on rolled blankets. Fires glowed softly as evening settled, their warm light reflected on the trunks of nearby trees. Alexander gathered his officers to discuss scouting routes toward the coast, choosing paths that offered smooth travel and access to reliable water sources. Their discussions flowed calmly, marked by the sense that each decision formed part of a larger movement, guided not by urgency, but by steady progression. As they resumed their journey the next morning, the presence of birds became more noticeable. Species accustomed to coastal climates moved across the sky in broad patterns, their calls echoing above the fields. The soldiers listened quietly, finding comfort in the predictable rhythm of nature. The road soon passed near low hills, where clusters of shrubs grew densely, shaped by the steady winds from the sea. Alexander took time to observe how each plant bent slightly in the same direction, showing how even vegetation adapted to the environment over time. The first true sign of the coastline appeared as a gentle rise that revealed a wider stretch of land ahead. The earth flattened into broad plains, dotted with settlements built along long, winding routes that funneled trade between inland regions and coastal towns. The closer they approached, the more visible the influence of maritime life became. Fishermen guided carts filled with woven nets toward nearby markets. Merchants carried crates packed with dried fish or sea herbs used for cooking. Craftsmen sold carved wooden boxes shaped from driftwood that had washed ashore during storms. These objects offered Alexander new glimpses into local craftsmanship shaped by the sea's steady presence. The army moved slowly through this region, ensuring that their arrival did not disrupt daily routines. Alexander continued to emphasize respectful interaction with villagers, encouraging his officers to maintain the quiet approach that had carried them peacefully through Asia Minor. His presence remained calm, guiding the men through each settlement without force, allowing them to blend into the quiet rhythm of the land rather than overtaking it. As they camped near a chain of gentle sand dunes that marked the first true boundary of the coastal world, the sound of distant waves became faintly audible. It was not loud, just a soft, steady pulse that drifted across the dunes, and into the camp like a natural lullaby. The men listened in silence, letting the rhythmic sound ease them into rest. Alexander found the quiet oceanic whisper soothing, sensing that this new phase of the journey would unfold with the same softness that had accompanied them thus far. The next morning, crossing the dunes revealed a wide view of the coastline stretching in both directions. The sea glimmered beneath the sun, its surface shifting with smooth, rolling motion. The air carried a cool freshness that brushed gently across the soldiers' faces. Some stood still for several moments, absorbing the peaceful view. The presence of the sea marked a transition, not in conflict or urgency, but in simple perspective. Alexander looked across the water with even breath, appreciating the vastness without haste. Nearby coastal towns came into clearer view as they followed the shoreline. Harbors lined with wooden piers extended into the water where fishing vessels bobbed calmly. Workers moved across the docks, loading baskets, sorting nets, or guiding goods toward market stalls. The atmosphere remained calm, shaped by the predictable routine of maritime life. Alexander and a small escort visited one of these towns, walking along stone pathways that lined the waterfront. The local officials greeted him politely, discussing the surrounding region, the routes connecting to larger coastal cities, and the schedules of trade ships that traveled between ports. Alexander's interactions remained steady and composed. He wandered among the fishermen who were repairing wooden floats, observed craftsmen smoothing planks for boat hulls, and watched as crates of goods were lifted gently onto waiting carts. The subtle soundtrack of the town, soft footsteps, the quiet splash of oars, the rustle of ropes, formed a peaceful backdrop to the slow conversations he shared with locals. As evening approached, the army camped near a sheltered inlet where the water reached far inland in a narrow, mirror-smooth channel. The men sat along the banks, watching the soft ripples move beneath the fading light. Alexander joined them, taking in the calm reflections of the sky on the water. A few birds landed near the shoreline, dipping their beaks into the shallows before lifting into the air again. The entire scene carried a tranquility that settled the minds of the soldiers after long days of marching. The following days continued along the coast in the same unhurried manner. The terrain shifted gently between sandy stretches and flat grasslands. The presence of the sea remained constant yet never overwhelming. The men adapted to the new environment with ease, maintaining the same steady formation that had guided them through mountains and plains. Alexander continued walking among them at times, ensuring that the journey remained smooth and that the army absorbed the calm atmosphere of the coast. As they approached a larger coastal city, one known for its balanced layout and organized markets, the quiet sense of transition grew stronger. The roads widened, houses stood closer together, and the soft energy of a bustling yet peaceful port settled across the landscape. Fishermen returned with late catches. Merchants arranged goods beneath awnings. Children ran along the piers, their footsteps light against the wood. Alexander paused before entering the city, letting the scene settle around him. The quiet sea, the distant calls of birds, the slow movement of the people, all blended into a single, gentle rhythm. And with that same steady rhythm, he and his men continued forward, ready to follow the coastline toward the next peaceful chapter of their long and quiet journey. Through the calm roads of the western coastlands. The approach toward the larger coastal settlements unfolded with gentle clarity, carried by the soft brightness of mornings where the sky stretched wide above the sea. The road followed the natural curve of the shoreline, weaving between low hills and long open fields that sloped quietly toward the water. Alexander and his men advanced with unhurried steps, moving within a peaceful landscape shaped by the rhythm of the waves and the steady breeze drifting inland. The first city they encountered along this western stretch of the coast welcomed them with the calm order of everyday routines. Fishermen guided boats toward shallow docks, merchants arranged crates of goods beneath shaded awnings, and artisans worked in open courtyards, smoothing timber or shaping clay with measured, practiced gestures. The locals greeted the approaching Macedonian escort with polite stillness rather than alarm, observing their movements with thoughtful curiosity instead of tension. Alexander moved through the streets at a slow pace, letting the surroundings settle naturally around him, while he listened to short descriptions of the region offered by local officials. The air carried the gentle scent of the sea mixed with faint aromas from food stalls, preparing simple coastal dishes. Children played along narrow lanes, skipping over puddles left by morning waves that had pushed onto the shore. Their footsteps created soft echoes against the stone paths, blending easily into the larger atmosphere of calm activity. Alexander observed these small details without disrupting them, appreciating how the city sustained its rhythm through practical routines and quiet cooperation. The army did not enter the city in full. Alexander allowed them to rest in orderly camps beside a series of gentle dunes just north of the walls. The location offered protection from wind and easy access to fresh water that flowed from a small estuary nearby. The men settled comfortably into the soft sand, building steady fires and preparing simple meals, while the glow from the city's lanterns shimmered faintly in the distance. The sound of waves became a natural companion to their rest, creating a soft pulse that guided them toward sleep. The next morning, Alexander continued his journey along the open road that traced the length of the coastline. Gentle ridges rose and fell alongside them, creating a pleasing variation in the landscape. Sometimes the road dipped close enough for the sea spray to drift lightly over the men's clothing. Other times it pulled inland toward groves of trees that provided broad, restful shade. The changing scenery offered a sense of steady renewal, even though each day carried the same calm progress. Occasional caravans met them along the way, their drivers sitting atop carts filled with baskets of fruit, pottery, bundles of dried herbs, or stacks of woven cloth intended for distribution in larger markets. These travelers spoke in low, even tones as they paused to let the army pass. Their conversations centered on weather patterns, seasonal fishing cycles, or distant ports. Alexander always responded with courtesy, exchanging brief information about road conditions and nearby water sources. These small interactions added to the feeling that each region flowed naturally into the next, connected by shared experiences rather than boundaries. As the day lengthened, the coastline widened into a broad expanse where the sea extended far beyond any settlement. The shoreline shifted subtly, forming gentle coves shaped by centuries of quiet waves. Alexander guided the march along these curves, allowing the men to enjoy the open horizon and the slow movement of boats that appeared as small, dark shapes far offshore. The soldiers relaxed into the scenery, letting the cool wind and steady sound of water ease the weight of their long journey. The army paused at a coastal rest station built from pale stone that blended smoothly into the surrounding landscape. The structure offered shelter, storage rooms, and a raised lookout where travelers could observe the water. Alexander explored the station with a small group of officers, noticing how well the builders understood the practical needs of those who moved frequently along the coast. The design reflected a balance of structure and openness, allowing travelers to feel protected without feeling enclosed. The men rested there until the evening light turned the sea a warm shade of gold. When they resumed their journey, the sound of distant seabirds accompanied them. These birds circled above the shoreline, their wings catching the soft light as they glided in slow, elegant arcs. The men watched them as they marched, finding comfort in their steady movements. Alexander walked beside his officers, discussing the locations of upcoming towns and the gentle pace they would maintain as they moved farther west. The next settlement appeared near a broad inlet where calm water reflected the sky like polished glass. Boats lined the quay in neat rows, their bows facing outward toward the open sea. The markets here displayed goods from several coastal regions, indicating that the town served as a crossroads for maritime trade. Alexander observed woven baskets filled with shells polished by natural currents, wooden carvings shaped from driftwood, and fabrics dyed with coastal pigments. These items illustrated how the region expressed its identity through materials gathered from land and sea alike. The townsfolk welcomed the visitors with composed hospitality. Local administrators met Alexander near the water's edge, leading him along pathways bordered by flowering shrubs and small stone markers. Information about warehouses, docks, and inland roads was shared with calm precision, allowing Alexander to understand how the town functioned without intruding upon its routines. The exchange was smooth, accompanied by the constant hush of the sea and the soft clatter of wooden crates being arranged by merchants. The army settled outside the town once more, creating a quiet pattern of camps along the coastline. The men set their tents in curved rows that followed the natural shape of the land, leaving wide passageways for movement and rest. The fires burned gently through the evening, their reflections flickering faintly on the nearby water. Alexander walked through the camp at dusk, listening to the soft conversations drifting between the tents. Stories from earlier parts of the journey resurfaced in quiet tones, mixing with observations about the new coastland environment. These gentle exchanges helped the army maintain unity, giving soldiers a sense of continuity, even as the landscape changed around them. Beyond the inlet, the army traveled through regions where low cliffs met the sea. The road followed the top of these cliffs, offering expansive views of water stretching into the distance. The wind carried a cool sharpness here, brushing past the men with steady persistence. Alexander paused at several lookout points, letting the men take in the sight before continuing along the winding cliffside path. These elevated stretches added variety to the journey without introducing hardship, rising gently and descending gradually toward the next quiet plains. As they continued westward, fields cultivated with care appeared on both sides of the road. Farmers harvested grains that grew well in the coastal climate, stacking bundles neatly along the edges of their land. Many of them paused when the army passed, leaning calmly on wooden tools as they observed the long line of men and animals moving with peaceful discipline. Alexander returned their gestures with small nods, recognizing the value of these communities that shaped the rhythm of the land. The road eventually guided them into an area where rivers approached the sea in braided patterns. Wooden bridges connected the paths, their planks smoothed by years of use. The sound of flowing water merged gently with the sound of waves, creating a layered harmony that accompanied the soldiers as they crossed. Alexander walked slowly across each bridge, watching the currents swirl below, and appreciating how the rivers carried a sense of continuity from inland regions toward the open horizon. As the sun set behind the western hills, the land settled into a deep calm. The coastline stretched in both directions, illuminated by the fading glow of day. The army made camp beside a wide curve of the shore, where the water moved with slow, steady breaths. The men arranged their tents in organized rows, lit small fires, and prepared evening meals with practiced ease. Alexander stood near the waterline, watching the gentle ripples that rolled over the sand at his feet. The night deepened with quiet grace. The sea whispered its soft rhythm, the fires dimmed, and the men drifted into rest under the broad sky. And with this gentle ending to another calm day along the coast, the journey continued its patient unfolding, guiding Alexander and his army along the quiet western edge of the land toward the chapters still waiting ahead. Into the gentle heart of the coastal provinces. The next stretch of the coastline opened gradually into a wide and welcoming landscape, shaped by years of soft winds and steady tides that had carved gentle curves into the shore. The mornings here began with a silver glow that spilled across the waves, turning the water into a long sheet of shifting light. Alexander and his men moved through this quiet brightness without hurry, letting the rhythm of the sea set the pace of the day. The road they followed passed between open fields, planted with hardy crops that thrived in the mild coastal climate. Farmers tended their land with deliberate care, working with broad straw hats and tools polished by long usage. When the army appeared along the horizon, the farmers did not stop entirely. Instead, they paused with calm curiosity, watching the slow procession before returning to their tasks. Their gestures held neither fear nor excitement, only a steady acceptance that came from living along a road used by travelers and merchants for generations. Small clusters of houses rose in regular intervals, built from pale stones that matched the color of the cliffs. Each settlement carried its own natural rhythm, children carrying baskets, elders seated beneath shaded porches, artisans shaping clay or weaving nets. Alexander observed these scenes with the soft attention of someone who understood the value of stability in unfamiliar lands. He made sure his men moved with the same quiet respect that had guided them since entering these coastal territories. The march led them to a larger inland by the sea town built near the mouth of a slow river. Wooden piers extended into the water and boats of every size drifted lazily on the gentle current. Merchants arranged their stalls along the riverside path, displaying goods that showed the blend of inland and maritime life, bundles of fish preserved in salt, baskets of fruit from nearby orchards, cloth dyed in light coastal tones, and pottery marked with wave-like patterns. Alexander walked through the marketplace with a small escort, listening to traders describe how the river connected their town to both distant ports and inland villages. Their voices carried a peaceful steadiness, reflecting the environment in which they lived. The The army rested near this town for a full afternoon. The men gathered beneath groves of trees where soft leaves rustled overhead. Some took the opportunity to wash garments in the river's shallow edges. Others shared simple meals while sitting along the grassy banks. A few watched the slow drift of fishing boats, following the calm movement of oars that dipped into the water with easy strokes. Alexander walked among them, acknowledging their efforts with gentle nods and appreciating how each pause strengthened their spirits for the long road ahead. When they resumed their journey, the road curved slightly inland, leading through a region of rolling hills that rose and fell with mild, forgiving slopes. The air here carried the scent of pine and distant salt, blending land and sea in a single breath. The soldiers adjusted their pace naturally as the terrain changed, maintaining the same disciplined formation while allowing their steps to fall in softer rhythm. Alexander moved on horseback at times, but often walked with his men, letting the shared movement reinforce a sense of togetherness. Travelers passed occasionally along this stretch, some carrying baskets suspended from yokes, others guiding small groups of pack animals. They greeted the army with quiet nods, stepping aside to make room on the road. A few travelers offered information about wells, shaded clearings, and gentle paths that cut through the hills. Alexander appreciated these small contributions, for they reflected the natural cooperation that characterized the coastal provinces. As the army descended the hills, the land opened again into a broad plain filled with clusters of farms connected by narrow irrigation channels. The channels glimmered in the afternoon light, guiding water through the soil in calm, steady lines. Workers moved along the paths beside them, tending to crops or directing water flow with simple wooden tools. Their movements were slow and rhythmic, creating a quiet harmony that blended easily with the soft breeze. Alexander paused briefly to observe how the entire plain seemed to operate as a single, living pattern. At the southern edge of this plain stood a town known for its long tradition of craftsmanship. Artisans worked beneath extended awnings, producing fine pottery, carved wooden vessels, and woven mats designed to withstand coastal humidity. Alexander walked through the artisans' quarter with the interest of someone who wished to understand the world through its quiet details. He noticed how each piece carried slight imperfections that revealed the human touch. Curves shaped by steady hands, patterns guided by memory rather than strict precision. These objects conveyed stories of patience and skill, rather than ambition or grandeur. The town's central square contained a stone fountain where water flowed gently into a wide basin. People gathered around its edges, filling jars, chatting softly, or resting on low stone steps. Alexander paused near the fountain to speak with local officials who shared information about the surrounding lands. They described stable weather patterns, seasonal harvesting, and the mildness of coastal winds that rarely grew harsh. The conversation carried a peaceful cadence, flowing naturally without urgency. Alexander and his officers camped outside the town that evening. The land sloped gently toward another stretch of coastline, allowing the men to rest while facing the open horizon. Fires were lit in small circles, their glow reflecting off cooking pots and polished armor. The soldiers ate quietly, sharing short stories or simple observations about the day's scenery. Alexander remained nearby, choosing a place where he could see both the camp and the shimmering outline of the sea. The environment offered a tranquil backdrop for rest, letting the men drift peacefully into sleep. The following morning, the march continued along a trail that followed the contours of low cliffs overlooking the water. The sea below moved with calm regularity, each wave rolling forward with a soft hush. The soldiers found comfort in the gentle sound, letting it accompany their footsteps. The path eventually dipped toward a small bay where fishermen were preparing their boats for the day. Nets hung from wooden frames, drying under the early sunlight. Wooden crates stood neatly beside the shore, ready to be loaded with the day's catch. Alexander watched as the fishermen pushed their boats onto the water with practiced ease, their motions steady and unhurried. Leaving the bay, the army followed a wide, sandy track that led toward a region known for its quiet, spacious terrain. Tall grasses moved in slow waves beneath the breeze, creating shifting patterns of light. Birds flew overhead in loose formations, occasionally circling before gliding toward inland watering holes. The soldiers marched through this landscape without strain, their steps softened by the sandy earth. Alexander appreciated how the environment offered a sense of openness that eased the mind and body. Farther along, the coastline gave way to a sheltered cove bordered by curved cliffs. The water here was unusually still, almost mirror smooth. Alexander allowed the men to rest at this spot, recognizing the peacefulness it offered. Some soldiers sat along the shoreline, letting the cool water wash over their hands. Others lay on the gentle slope of the beach, listening to the soft lapping of waves. The atmosphere created a natural pause in the journey, allowing the army to absorb the calmness of the sea before continuing. When they resumed the march, the path began to angle slightly inland again, passing through groves of trees with thick, low branches that created natural arches over the road. Rays of sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting shifting patterns onto the ground. The soldiers moved beneath these green corridors with quiet appreciation, their conversations reduced to soft murmurs. Alexander walked near the front, letting the serenity of the scene ease the weight of command. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, the army reached the edge of a broad plateau that overlooked yet another stretch of coast. The view extended in both directions, framed by the warm light of evening. Alexander stood at the edge of the plateau for a moment, watching the sea glow beneath the fading sun. The men gathered behind him, taking in the same peaceful sight. There was no rush, no spark of urgency, only the shared understanding that the journey continued in its calm, unbroken way. The camp for the night was established near this vantage point. Fires flickered gently across the plateau, their warmth blending with the coolness of the sea air. The men finished their meals slowly, speaking in soft tones, before allowing the quiet of the night to settle around them. Alexander moved among them with a steady presence, offering nods of reassurance, before standing once more at the edge of the plateau. Below, the sea shifted with a muted glow, reflecting the last traces of daylight. Above, the sky opened into vast darkness, sprinkled with faint stars. The journey had carried them through changing landscapes, but the quiet thread that held them together remained the same. And so, under the calm blanket of coastal night, Alexander and his men rested once more, prepared to continue into the next gentle province that waited beyond the morning light. The slow roads toward the broad southern harbors. The morning light settled gently over the plateau, spreading a soft glow across the land before Alexander and his men resumed their march. The air carried a coolness shaped by the sea, drifting inland in wide, even breaths. The road ahead descended gradually from the high ground, curving through quiet stretches of grassland that swayed in low, unbroken waves. The soldiers moved with calm discipline, their steps merging naturally with the peaceful rhythm of the landscape. As they advanced, the coastline reappeared slowly through gaps in the terrain. The sea stretched outward in muted shades of blue and silver, shifting with the quiet pull of distant currents. Birds glided along the shoreline, occasionally dipping toward the water before rising again with unhurried ease. Alexander watched these movements with appreciation, finding comfort in the steadiness of nature that accompanied their journey day after day. The landscape began to widen as the army approached a region known for its connection to larger harbors. The settlements here appeared gradually, each one slightly larger than the last. Houses were built from smooth stone arranged in broad patterns, indicating craftsmanship shaped by generations of coastal living. Fishermen repaired nets near their doorways, merchants arranged crates beside shaded stalls, and children carried baskets filled with herbs or small parcels for their families. The presence of the army blended into this quiet activity without disruption, as the people had grown accustomed to travelers and trade moving steadily along the coast. Alexander led a small group through one of the larger villages, observing how the morning market opened with a balanced pace. Stallholders displayed fresh fish laid across smooth wooden boards, pottery marked with repeating wave designs, and bundles of grain collected from nearby fields. The atmosphere held no urgency, only the soft cadence of daily life shaped by predictable tides and mild weather. Alexander spoke briefly with the village leaders, who welcomed him with steady composure while describing the roads leading toward the harbors farther south. The march continued along a route that crossed gentle streams reflecting patches of sky. The men paused occasionally to refill water containers, wash their hands, or simply observe the slow swirl of water around smooth stones. These moments offered quiet grounding, allowing them to rest without breaking the flow of the journey. Alexander often walked ahead during these pauses, letting the soft sounds of water settle into his thoughts before signaling the march to resume. The next portion of the road threaded between low hills, covered in short grass and wildflowers. Soft breezes carried the light scent of blooming plants, adding a gentle freshness to the air. The soldiers moved in relaxed columns, their footsteps muffled by the natural softness of the terrain. Birds sang intermittently from the hilltops, offering brief melodies that drifted across the open land. Alexander found these small sounds comforting, a reminder that each new region carried its own subtle character. By midday, the road descended toward a broad estuary, where a large river merged with the sea. The water formed calm, wide pools that reflected the movement of clouds overhead. Small boats floated near wooden docks, built along the riverbanks, their hulls shaped by craftsmen who understood the needs of both inland and coastal travel. Merchants moved steadily along the docks, loading crates, tying ropes, or preparing goods for the next tide. The quiet synchronization of their movements showed a community well adapted to the steady rhythm of trade. Alexander observed the estuary with interest, noting the natural balance of land and water that made the region an ideal waiting place for travelers. He walked along the dock with a small escort, listening to the creak of ropes, the soft splash of oars dipping in the water, and the steady hum of conversation among workers. The local officials greeted him with polite nods, offering calm explanations about the harbor routes, the distribution of goods, and the mild currents that shaped the estuary's environment. The army rested near the river for several hours before continuing toward the open coast. The path leading out of the estuary was smooth and wide, bordered by reeds that rustled softly in the wind. The soldiers walked with even steps, allowing their thoughts to settle while they listened to the gentle sounds that surrounded them. Alexander remained near the front, maintaining the steady pace that had carried them through so many regions. As they progressed, the coastline grew nearer once again. The land sloped toward a wide stretch where the sand met the water in long, uninterrupted lines. The sea moved with a calmness that seemed almost deliberate, its waves rolling forward in shallow arcs. Fishermen could be seen pulling boats onto the sand or preparing lines for the next catch. Their motions reflected a quiet routine built upon years of practice. The army followed the shoreline for several miles, enjoying the expansive view that stretched into the distance. The men breathed more deeply, feeling the cool freshness of the sea settle around them. Alexander allowed them to pause at a small lagoon where the water gathered in a still, sheltered pool. Some soldiers removed their footwear to wade in the shallows, while others sat upon flat stones warmed by the sun. The scene carried a tranquility that eased both fatigue and thought. Farther down the coast, the path angled inland once more, leading toward a town known for its orderly harbors. The approach was marked by neat rows of trees that guided travelers toward the town's entrance. The branches created a shaded canopy above the road, allowing sunlight to filter through in soft, shifting patterns. Alexander appreciated this thoughtful arrangement, recognizing the care taken by the town's residents to shape the road into a welcoming corridor. Upon entering the town, Alexander noticed how the buildings were arranged with careful symmetry. Markets formed wide squares, and warehouses stood near the waterfront in long, organized rows. Workers moved calmly between them, carrying crates or rolling barrels across smooth stone surfaces. The harbors extended gracefully into the sea, their wooden beams casting thin shadows across the water. Ships of various sizes rocked gently with the tide, their sails tied neatly to their masts. Alexander walked along the harbor with a small group of officers, observing the balanced activity of the workers. Conversations with the local administration revealed a region shaped by dependable trade, mild weather, and a long tradition of maritime cooperation. The air carried a mixture of salt, wood, and faint fragrances from nearby warehouses storing herbs and dried goods. Each detail contributed to the town's gentle rhythm, which Alexander found quietly admirable. The army settled at a clearing just outside the town, arranging tents in a broad arc that faced the sea. The men prepared meals, shared small stories of earlier days, and rested with their backs against their packs while watching the calm movement of boats on the horizon. Fires flickered softly as dusk approached, their smoke rising into the cooling air. Alexander moved among the men with measured steps, offering calm reassurance through presence rather than words. Night fell quietly along the southern coast. The sea shimmered beneath the moonlight, and the breeze carried a coolness that soothed the tired soldiers. Alexander stood at the edge of the camp, letting the quiet expand around him. The faint glow of lanterns from the harbor created a gentle contrast against the dark water, adding to the stillness of the night. When morning came, the army resumed its march again, unhurried steady, guided by the same soft rhythm that had accompanied them since leaving the northern lands. The road led onward toward even broader harbors, and the journey continued under skies that stretched endlessly above, filled with calm promise. The quiet approach to the southern horizon. The soft glow of another coastal morning rose along the wide harbors, spreading gentle light across calm waters that moved only slightly beneath the early breeze. The air carried the familiar scent of salt, mixed with the warmth of wooden piers, where boats rested in long, peaceful rows. Under this muted brightness, Alexander and his men prepared to continue their slow march southward, moving once more into regions shaped by open land and the quiet touch of the sea. The road leaving the harbor town curved along a line of low ridges overlooking broad estuaries. These waterways flowed into the sea with steady patience, shaped by years of gentle tides. Fishermen guided their small boats into narrow channels, their oars dipping with unhurried rhythm. The soldiers watched them while passing, letting the movement of the boats blend with the measured pace of their march. Alexander walked at the front, appreciating Ho. The land gradually opened into long plains, softened by tall grasses that swayed in slow arcs as the breeze passed through them. The soldiers followed paths that wound quietly between these fields, their footsteps muted by the sandy earth. Birds glided above in even flights, sometimes settling on fence posts, before lifting again with soft rustles. Alexander watched these calm patterns, finding comfort in how evenly the world moved around them. Villages appeared at gentle intervals along the route. Each settlement reflected the same tranquil character found throughout the coast. Stone houses arranged in tidy clusters, open courtyards shaded by wooden beams, and markets that eased into the day rather than rushing into it. Merchants laid out baskets, fishermen arranged nets, and farmers guided animals toward nearby fields. The army blended into this routine without disturbance. Alexander moved softly among the people, greeting elders with polite nods and listening to their quiet descriptions of the lands ahead. In one village, a wide square sat beneath a large tree whose branches spread into a natural canopy. Children played in its shade while artisans worked nearby, carving wood or shaping tools. Alexander paused near the tree, appreciating how the sunlight filtered through the leaves to create gentle patterns on the ground. His men rested here briefly, filling water containers at a stone basin fed by a clear underground spring. The trickle of water added a calm note to the square. The march continued southward, and the land shifted once more. Low hills stretched toward the coastline, forming natural terraces overlooking wide stretches of water. The sea shimmered under the afternoon light, its surface broken only by distant fishing boats, moving at a slow drift. Traders crossed paths with the army, guiding carts filled with cloth, pottery, or herbs. They greeted the soldiers quietly before continuing along their routes, contributing to the sense of steady movement that defined the region. The road soon dipped toward a smooth arc of coastline where the sand stretched in pale, gentle curves. Alexander allowed his men to rest here, encouraging them to sit near the water as the breeze cooled their faces. Some soldiers walked along the edge of the tide, letting waves rise around their ankles. Others sat on large, sun-warmed stones, watching the calm flow of the horizon. Alexander remained close by, drawn to the subtle rise and fall of the tide. When they they resumed the march, the path turned inland again, entering a region dotted with orchards and quiet groves. Workers moved between the trees with steady movements, their baskets filled with fruit that carried a sweet scent through the afternoon air. Alexander exchanged small greetings with the orchard keepers, learning how the climate supported gentle harvests year after year. By evening, the terrain rose toward a broad ridge that overlooked a valley stretching far into the distance. Small homes stood near winding rivers, and thin columns of smoke drifted upward from cooking fires. Alexander directed the army to camp upon the ridge. From this height, the valley appeared peaceful, under the warm light of dusk. The soldiers arranged their tents in calm formation, and fires flickered softly as they prepared their meals. Night settled gradually. The sky opened to reveal clusters of stars forming faint, familiar shapes. The men spoke quietly, sharing gentle reflections before drifting into rest. Alexander walked to the ridge's edge and watched moonlight fall across the valley, its glow giving the land a silver softness. The quiet felt complete, as if the world were settling into stillness alongside them. At dawn, the march resumed. The road guided them down into the valley, across narrow rivers crossed by wooden bridges polished from years of use. Alexander crossed one of these bridges on foot, observing the slow swirl of water beneath him. The movement felt steady and dependable, mirroring the rhythm of their long journey. The valley opened into another coastal plain. Workers harvested crops in the wide fields, their movements creating calm patterns across the landscape. The army passed without disrupting their work, and Alexander noted how the region's stability came not from grandeur, but from the quiet consistency of daily routines. Ahead, the final stretch of their coastal route unfolded. The land sloped gradually downward toward a broad shoreline. From the last rise before the sea, the coastline extended in both directions beneath the soft haze of the southern horizon. The wind carried a faint warmth, marking the transition to a region where land and sea blended into one continuous calm. Alexander paused on the rise with his men. The view was expansive, serene, unbroken. The sea rolled forward with slow, even breaths. The land stretched outward beneath the pale morning light, and the road continued, calm and open. They descended toward the shore one last time, their steps light, their movements unhurried. The army walked together as the day's brightness softened, allowing the long passage through the coast to drift into memory. When they reached the wide shoreline, they arranged their camp, facing the sea. Fires glowed at dusk, their reflections trembling softly across the water. And as the quiet night settled across the southern horizon, Alexander stood at the water's edge, listening to the slow, steady movement of the waves. The journey had carried them through villages, fields, orchards, cliffs, ridges, and harbors. Every step held in the same gentle rhythm. Now, beneath the calm sweep of stars, the long thread of their 11-part path rested in perfect stillness, soft as the tide itself.